So good morning, everybody. Welcome to this conference, or welcome back to those of you who already joined us yesterday and discussed with us the important topic of from takers to shapers, challenges for regions in a dynamic EU polity. And what we already discussed today is the role of regions as actors in EU constitution making over time, with a particularly focus on the one hand on the role of the Committee of the Region in the EU polity and how the role has evolved over time. And the other aspect which on the other hand was very important in our discussion yesterday is of course the conference on the future of Europe, which is officially going to be opened in 2 days on Sunday in Strasbourg by the presidents of the 3 EU institutions, the official beginning. And that is, of course, an issue which is also very, very important for the regions. We will come back to that today. And then a third aspect, which always sneaked in, is obviously the pandemic, because the pandemic is a great challenge for regions, and many of the challenges linked to the pandemic, health provisions, implementation of rules, and all that is something that is done at regional level. And we will certainly come back to also to that topic today over the course of the 2 sessions which we have in the conference today. And certainly the pandemic, that is the issue which will be addressed but in the keynote lecture today, because today from 12 to 13, we have a talk by Professor Simona Piattoni on regional voices in multi-level politics and the pandemic. And of course, you're all invited to participate in this keynote lecture. What we want to do this morning in our first session is to look into how can regions and their parliaments shape the EU, because what we see ever too often in discussions about the role of regions is actually a focus on executive, on regional governments and their involvement in EU affairs at national level, at the EU level more directly. And if we discuss, I believe so, the role of regions as providing additional democratic legitimacy to EU policy making, to the EU polity at large, then we should not forget about the parliaments, because they are in democratic systems, and even more so in parliamentary system, the bearers of democratic legitimacy. So I'm very happy to chair this morning's sessions on the involvement of parliaments, and I'm very happy that we have 4 excellent speakers here with 4 papers and 2 great discussants. And I would just briefly like to introduce the speakers here. I will already do that in the order in which they present their papers, because we will proceed in the order of the program. And we will start with Paul Kindermann, who's a research associate of the RegioPol project, which is a project which investigates the role of regional parliaments in EU polity. And as you can see from my virtual background, RegioPol is also one of the cooperating partners for this conference, and so is the Arbeitskreis Europäische Integration, which is cooperating here. So I'm very happy about that. Great to see you, Paul. And then we have second presentation by Professor Dr. Peter Busjäger, who's a professor of constitutional law and administrative law at the University of Innsbruck. And Peter Busjäger was previously also director of the regional parliament of Vorarlberg in Austria. The third speaker, welcome to Caroline Charlotte Kosel. I'm happy to have you here because she's the head of the liaison office of the Bavarian State Parliament in Brussels, because as many of you know, the a number of regional parliaments, and certainly the German Landtage, the regional parliaments, have offices set up in Brussels, and so has the Bavarian one. And we are happy to have you here, because what I felt is always very important and productive to have practitioners, the people who do the work on the ground, involved in discussions and not just to have an academic discourse. And then the fourth paper is issued by Sarah Meyer together with Mario Wolf. They are both also from the RegioPal project, and so they will also focus on German regional parliaments and the members and their networking activities. So these are the four presenters that we have, and then I'm happy to have two discussants. First is Professor Dr. Annegret Eppler, who's Jean Monnet Chair for Local Communities in the European Union at the University of Public Administration in Kehl, which is right at the French border here in Baden-Württemberg, across from Strasbourg. And finally, great to see you, Marcin Zubek, who's assistant professor at the Jagiellonian University in Krakow, Poland. So welcome to everybody. Good to see you, and I'm looking forward to your presentations. And what we will do, I will give you 15 minutes each for your presentations, and then the two discussants have 10 minutes to respond to the papers. Each of them will comment on 2 papers, and I would like to encourage our audience to make use of the chat function, so that you already in between can start writing your ideas, your questions to the panelists or to individual panelists into the chat function, because I will keep an eye on what's happening in the chat function. That is one option, or the other option, if you rather want to do that by unmuting your mic, you can raise the hand if you go in Zoom into this Teilnehmer participant function, where you find an icon which allows you to raise your hand virtually, and then I can see that in that here in the menu. So, and as I said, I would like to encourage you to participate here so that we can have a quite good exchange. Right, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Paul Kindermann, who's presenting a paper, more theoretical one, conceptualizing the potential role of regional parliaments in democratizing the EU and analytical framework. Okay, I mute myself. It's up to you now, Paul.
Thanks. Thank you, Gabi, for the introduction. A theoretical paper indeed. I hope that can be the ground for some discussion still. Thanks also for including the paper in the conference program. I have some slides prepared, so I'm gonna share my screen now and hope that you can see that. Does that work? Maybe some sign?
Yes, it does.
Perfect. Thank you. Right. So I'm just going to very briefly sketch the idea of the paper, since I'm very much looking forward to some comments and criticisms by our discussants. My paper addresses the role of regional parliaments in EU democracy, that is, regional parliaments with legislative competences as the subset of legislative assemblies that has become part of the early warning system with the introduction of the Treaty of Lisbon. And what I'm arguing in the paper, really in a nutshell, is that we find a narrative, both in scholarly literature and in political discourse, about the added democratic value of involving these regional parliaments in the EU multi-level system. But we lack a clear conceptualization of how regional parliamentary involvement would theoretically facilitate such effects on the democratic legitimacy of EU public policy. And the framework that I try to sketch in the paper seeks to provide such an account, and thus sort of an analytical lens through which we should assess the role of regional parliaments in, or well, rather for, EU democracy. Again, very short, the underlying idea of the framework basically is to start from the discussion of particular problems, sort of stylized problems of EU democratic legitimacy, and then frame the normative significance of regional parliamentary functions along the lines of their theoretical potential to contribute to the remedy of these problems, to the remedy of these shortcomings of democratic legitimacy. And in my remarks, I will just very briefly provide sort of an overview of the argument and the framework, sketching first the background of the paper and the research interest. Second, very briefly go through the components of the analytical framework, and then summarize its purpose. And finally, again, very briefly sketch an application of the framework with one exemplary observation, which in this case pertains to the relation of parliamentary oversight or scrutiny and policy shaping and responsiveness as regional parliamentary functions on the other hand. So first on the background and the research interest. At a 2014 conference, which was hosted by the Committee of the Regions under the heading of Strengthening the Role of Regional Parliaments in EU Affairs, our host, Gabi Abels, pointed out that, quote, the predominant answer given to the question of why regional parliaments should play a role in EU affairs was that regional parliamentary involvement improved the overall democratic legitimacy of the EU. And indeed, this is the or a prevailing narrative among stakeholders, respective regional political actors, or the Committee of the Regions, who in this case stipulates that the further involvement, quote, of regional parliaments into the EU decision-making processes could enhance democratic control and accountability. And from the academic perspective, Annalena Hügenauer and Gabi Abels rather recently stated in a special issue on the topic, quote, that if the development of multi-level parliamentarism should be a remedy to the infamous democratic deficit of the EU, then it is important to include the third level and its contribution to democratic legitimacy in empirical analysis and in conceptual development, end of quote. So the starting point of my paper is that this potential contribution to counteracting the EU's democratic deficit has not really been conceptualized in terms of normative analysis so far. More precisely, while scholars have pointed out why some regional parliaments can and should be involved, more or less directly, in EU affairs, they have not specified how such involvement may curb the democratic shortcomings of the EU. Now, those recent contributions on regional parliaments in EU affairs that do consider normative issues, most cases refer to models of parliamentary involvement in the EU, like multi-level representative democracy from Arthur Benz, or the multi-level parliamentary field, which is a concept by Crum and Fossum. They do so as a means to conceive of the democratic role of regional parliaments in EU multi-level governance or the multi-level system. The problem, or so I argue in the paper, with these approaches is that they refer to such models. They have never really applied them to regional parliaments, or at least have not applied them in a way that would show how the involvement of regional parliaments into, for example, a or the multi-level parliamentary field might curb which aspect of the EU's democratic shortcoming. And my point here is that if regional parliaments should be strengthened in EU affairs because of their democratic potential to address the deficit, I mean, that's sort of the core issue here, then we should also be able to explain which of the parliamentary roles and functions would bear which improvement of EU democracy. Falling short of extending the normative analysis to that extent amounts to what I in the paper would refer to as the unclear normative grammar of regional parliamentary involvement. And without going into too much details of this diagnosis and the literature, I suggest that the framework that I propose in the paper can actually clarify this normative grammar, and that it aims to make the normatively significant connections between regional parliamentary functions on the one hand and the EU's democratic shortcomings explicit, or at least more explicit. So how do I do that? Well, the approach that I suggest aims to do that by grounding the normative analysis of the democratic role of regional parliaments, as I mentioned, in specific aspects of the democratic deficit. It starts from what you see here on the slide, 3 problems, sort of stylized problems of democratic legitimacy in the EU that should serve as heuristic tools for the normative analysis. I will get back to that in a second. Just very briefly on these 3 problems, I frame the first problem of democratic legitimacy under the heading of executive dominance, describing a constellation in which executive actors engage in a form of political decision-making that is, as such, you might say, removed from effective parliamentary oversight. The second problem that I discuss, or is discussed as lack of responsiveness of EU policymaking, in this case, draws attention to the output dimension of EU democracy and pertains to the problem that EU policymaking is institutionally remote from the policy preferences of European citizens. It's remote in the sense that EU policy preferences have only an indirect influence on EU policy outcomes for a variety of reasons, especially because of their insulation, because of the insulation of governments from electoral pressures in the Council, as Forrestal and Hicks famously put it. And the final problem is termed, again, somewhat stylized, democratic disaffection, which I argue in the paper can capture 2 aspects that have been discussed extensively in EU affairs. On the one hand, the lack of Europeanized public spheres and public opinion formation on European issues, and on the other hand, the one-sided politicization of the EU and of European integration. The main part of the paper then elaborates these 3 problems and assigns different regional parliamentary functions to them respectively. I argue in the paper, this is sort of making a big leap, leaving a lot of discussion out here. I argue in the paper that this discussion basically evokes the following set of functions, which I categorize according to their constituency focus, which is this little added C, or their institution focus, which is the little added I. So with regard to the different roles and institutional roles, that is, and activities of regional parliaments, these functions here on the slide, or so I argue in the paper, capture those parliamentary contributions to the functioning of the overall multi-level system that could theoretically, again, contribute to the curtailment of the 3 problems of democratic legitimacy, respectively. At least that's the idea. And since this is rather general and abstract, I just wanted to give a short example from the discussion, considering some aspects of the case of executive dominance, the first problem that I suggested. In the paper, I broadly distinguish between 2 aspects of executive dominance in the EU, 2 aspects which apply to the role of regional parliaments, that is. Both aspects bear on the challenge of making executive power accountable at different levels of the EU multi-level system. First, with regard to executive discretion at EU level, and second, with regard to the position of subnational executive actors in EU multi-level governance. Now, regarding the analytical framework, regional parliamentary functions could be conducive to the curtailment of these 2 aspects, these 2 problematic aspects, insofar as they add or strengthen parliamentary accountability of executive actors. Theoretically, they can exercise their scrutiny function of EU policymaking more or less directly at 3 distinct sites at EU level, including, for example, their representation in the Committee of the Regions, or performing a scrutiny function via representatives in forums of transnational parliamentary corporations like CALRE. Or they can scrutinize national or regional, or national and regional governments in the context of domestic EU policy coordination, sort of on the national, in the domestic realm. And then also consider that communicative functions, which you saw on the slide before, can theoretically support the scrutiny function, sort of with a view to acquiring information on EU policy and or bundling resources in interparliamentary networking. And again, very briefly, in this fashion, obviously in more detail, I discuss in the paper the various functions of regional parliaments and their normative significance in the face of the 3 problems. Eventually, so I argue, the discussion of the 3 problems spawns the following pattern of regional parliamentary functions. I'll get back to that in a second. So the suggested approach, I would argue, has the advantage of, on the one hand, really focusing normative analysis on sufficiently specific aspects of EU democracy, but on the other hand, or at the same time, resting on rather broad normative assumptions that can be shared by a variety of theories, again, or so I argue in the paper. So in summary, if the construction of these democratic problems is convincing, and if the accompanying pattern of regional parliamentary functions is complete, then the framework should be suitable to ground the normative analysis of the democratic role of regional parliaments in the EU. And then, sort of in effect, or to illustrate, it would structure the overall research question: which parliamentary functions of regional parliaments may serve which democratic purpose that would curb which problem of democratic legitimacy in the EU. Now, back to the table. It could suggest that there are indeed plenty of ways in which regional parliaments could contribute to EU democracy, but this is obviously an analytical assessment, and it neither includes claims about, first, the feasibility and scope of the different sides of engagement, nor does it include, on the other hand, claims about their normative weight, respectively. And although I sketch 3 normative criteria in form of these problems, we would need to argue through these 2 aspects, so feasibility and scope and normative weight, for the whole range of regional parliamentary sides of engagement, respectively, if we want to get a comprehensive picture. So my last remark, or let's say in the final section of the paper, I thus attempt to apply the framework and try to convey the value of this normative analysis with an exemplary observation, which now will be my final remarks. And this exemplary observation, based on the analytical framework, concerns the contrast, it's my last slide, between, on the one hand, the potential of regional parliaments to counter executive dominance, the first problem, in the EU by providing genuine forms of accountability, and on the other hand, their options to shape policymaking via various channels and sites in the multi-level system of government. And sure enough, there are some parliamentary activities that clearly contribute to both aspects. Sort of established processes of political contestation, for example, in committee work or in public parliamentary debate, it could be argued, are conducive to, at the same time, on the one hand, creating public and eventually electoral pressures that can make executive actors more responsive to policy preferences. So here we're talking about democratic responsiveness, while on the other hand, shining a public light on the performance and decisions of executive actors, and so holding them to account for their behavior. There are, and this is sort of the crucial point, this observation, however, also sites of regional parliamentary engagement in our functional pattern, where regional parliaments are confined to more or less informal mechanisms of policy shaping, of voice without will, to use the notions from Nati Orinati. And here, their role is, theoretically, confined to that of a potentially well-networked actor with the potential to transpose regional concerns and interests. And sure enough, in this case, regional parliamentary involvement may be of added value and very much desirable in terms of policy responsiveness or good governance, but it would not pertain to the problem of executive dominance, when here, in the case of executive dominance, the problem is a lack of parliamentary oversight in the EU system. And again, what this very brief example should show more generally is that it is very important to clearly differentiate the normative rationales, the different normative rationales of regional parliamentary involvement in EU affairs according to the different democratic issues that they may tackle in the system. In this sense, the analytical framework outlined in the paper puts the normative significance of the different sides of involvement into perspective, if you like. And it urges scholars, finally, to clearly separate the assessment of regional parliamentary functions with a view to their varying and, I would argue, often rather narrow potential to contributing to the remedy of the EU's democratic deficit. That's it from me. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Paul, for presenting your ideas about how to theorize about what we can see here on the ground in terms of regional parliamentary involvement. And I'm sure that your framework, your ideas will be taken up also by other speakers in the discussion, because I completely agree that there is more need for theorizing here. And thanks for keeping the time. We are still very good in timing. And the next three papers, I can assure you, are more hands-on papers. Definitely the next two, for those of you who have more a practical background and are not that familiar with the kind of theoretical thinking in democratic theory. And you already mentioned Paul Kallre, and so our next presenter, Peter Busjäger, he will talk about Kallre, which is the Conference of European Legislative Assemblies, and poses a provocative question: much ado about nothing. Okay, Peter, floor is yours.
So, thank you, Gabriele. Thank you for inviting me to this interesting conference. Thank you for inviting me to talk about Kallre. Maybe I'm not the only expert for Kallre, but I had to do some years ago intensively with this organization, and my paper is an updated version of a contribution in the book of Gabriele Abels and Annegret Eppler on the subnational parliaments in the EU, published in 2015. And the contribution was titled Kallre, an effective network for regional parliaments. And you gave me the title Kallre, much ado about nothing, question mark. Let's look if something has changed since 2015. I will give you a short introduction and then go a little bit into the details. Subnational parliaments are faced with the problem of deparliamentization through integration. They lose competences towards the European and national level, and unlike national governments, they cannot compensate their loss of power with participation in the multi-level decision-making process. And regional parliaments with legislative competences, they are faced with an additional problem. They have to implement European law into their regional legal order, and they cannot adequately participate in the decision-making process. And in the European politics are several organizations dealing with regional interests and also with regional parliaments. One of them is CALRE. It is the Conference of the European Regional Legislative Assemblies. CALRE is composed of the presidents and only of the presidents of all subnational parliaments in the EU with legislative competences. And now let's have a look at the history of CALRE. The founding of CALRE took place at a time when European regions were faced with enforced integration, the result of which was not only a loss of national competences to the European Union, but also restrictions of the competences of regions, and especially for regions with legislative competences. And CALRE was founded in 1997 in Oviedo in Spain, inspired very strong by two presidents of regional parliaments with legislative competences, and of the Peter Straub, from the former president of the Landtag of Baden-Württemberg, and the former president of the Austrian Landtag, Helmut Schreiner. And there were various declarations, the Stuttgart Declaration, adopted in May 1997 during an international conference organized by the Landtag of Baden-Württemberg, a declaration in which the regional parliaments with legislative competences demanded for the enforcing of the principle of subsidiarity in the EU. And this was also the key theme of CALRE during all those years of its existence, to demand for implementing the subsidiarity principle and the enforcement of a subsidiarity monitoring, this involvement of regional parliaments with legislative competences. And now, currently, CALRE consists of a total of 74 presidents of European legislative assemblies, 17 from the Spanish autonomous communities, 20 presidents of Italian regions, 16 presidents of German Landtage, 9 presidents of Austrian Landtage, 5 from Belgian communities and regions. And in CALRE, there are also represented the Portuguese regions of Azores and Madeira, the Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales from the UK, and finally the Åland Islands in Finland. And CALRE is an organization based on voluntary cooperation. It is a clearly informal cooperation of regional parliaments with legislative competences in Europe. The goals of CALRE are provided in the organizational rules and internal rules, and there are 5 goals formulated in the organizational rules. First, CALRE makes a contribution to the democratic participation of regional legislative assemblies within the framework of the European Union and by strengthening the relations between the regional assemblies, in particular by exchanging good practices. The second goal is CALRE supports the activities of cross-border cooperation of its associates. And third, CALRE coordinates its members in their participation in institution building projects organized by third parties. The goal 4 and 5 are more principles than really goals. Fourth, CALRE fully respects the principle of the autonomy of each assembly, and membership and participation, as this was said before, are voluntary. It is remarkable in this context that an essential goal pursued by CALRE ever since its establishment is not even mentioned in the organizational rules. As I said, the improving the legal status of CALRE regions in the EU, it was ever, in fact, an essential goal of CALRE, and especially providing or strengthening the status of regions with legislative competences in the treaties. CALRE consists of several internal bodies, but I don't go much in the details. But want to show you a little bit more about the products of CALRE, the CALRE declarations. But before I go in on this slide, I want to say that the work of CALRE is conducted meanwhile in 11 working groups. CALRE has established meanwhile 11 working groups that focus, for example, on migration policies and human rights, better regulation and policy evaluation, depopulation and aging, natural disasters, strategies for sustainable development of European regions, language and cultural diversity, gender equality, subsidiarity, cohesion policy, interactive democracy, and health inequalities. It is very difficult to analyze the outcome of these working groups. The website of CALRE in most cases lacks recent information. So it was also typically for the situation of this organization. I have the impression that during the last years, the networking activities of CALRE were intensified. This counts especially in respect of the cooperation with the Committee of Regions. In 2019, the common project of CALRE and the Committee of Regions was started input from debates in regional parliaments, in which regional parliaments are enabled to present views towards the working program of the Commission. These inputs should be incorporated in resolutions of the Committee of Regions. And for example, in 2018, CALRE participated in a workshop, Regional Legislative Parliaments, what role in EU's cohesion policy beyond 2020 in the European Week of Regions. All these projects may have a positive impact on the visibility of CALRE on the European stage, but not more. And now let's go to the most essential products of CALRE on the aspect of visibility, the CALRE declarations, which are formulated each year in a yearly conference in the plenary assembly of CALRE. And the declarations are an important instrument in making the goals of the organization visible. But in practice, if you look at the declarations formulated in, meanwhile, nearly 25 years, they are repeatedly dealing with the handling of the principle of subsidiarity, and they have problems to formulate, to gain new topics. The key points of CALRE declarations in the past years remained mostly the same. There are only few new topics. For example, the migration crisis, which was mentioned and dealt with in the Declaration of Seville 2017, or presently post-COVID recovery plans. But these are exceptions from the principle that the CALRE declarations have the problem to find new topics, with the exception of the subsidiarity monitoring. And the organization is faced with some structural problems. The first, from my point of view, is the principle of anonymity. It leads to the fact that the cooperation and the participation of the region with legislative competences in CALRE is voluntary. And this principle leads to the consequence that declarations are more or less compromise agreements. And it is also clear that these compromise formulas are resulting from a certain division between northern and southern regions in Europe with legislative competences. And there are different economical situation, there are different political situation, and so the only common goal is more or less enforcing subsidiarity monitoring. But it is difficult for CALRE to find in these resolutions, in these declarations yearly in the plenary assembly to go beyond this single common topic. And one result is further that we have uneven representation of parliaments in plenary sessions, meaning that southern regions are better represented than northern regions. And a long discussion was during many years to establish a permanent general secretariat. And this project was opposed by the northern regions, especially German Landtage and Austrian Landtage. They feared that it would lead to unacceptable costs and lead to establishing some kind of bureaucracy. But the lack of the existence of a general secretariat means that the representation of CALRE on the European level, the visibility of CALRE on the European level depends from the respective president and his capacities and the capacities of its parliament, and there are many differences between the engagement of the presidents and the parliaments of the regions with legislative competences in Europe. And the next structural problem I've mentioned before, they have, except the strengthening of the principle of subsidiarity and to introduce some instruments and methods of subsidiarity monitoring, they lack clear goals. And so I come to the outlook and to the last slide. The situation of CALRE shows also in the year 2021, 5 years after I have finished my contribution in the book of Gabriele and Annegret, that severe structural deficits are existing, and CALRE can, from my point of view, not be called a very effective network for regional parliaments. I have mentioned, I have the impression that network activities are currently increasing and stronger than they were some years before, but that's a personal impression and difficult to say to which results it will lead. And some of its deficits are typical for parliaments in multi-level systems, and others derive from the weakness of subnational entities in the EU. Nevertheless, CALRE is, I have said, suffering from the heterogeneity of its members, and it's also a problem that we have several coexisting organizations of regional interests in the EU systems. And from my point of view, CALRE would require a stronger profile as an organization representing regions in Europe. It should focus on strengthening the role of European regions with legislative competences, and it should lay the focus on legislative competences. I have listened to many-fold workshops, working groups of CALRE, and you can discuss if it should more focus on the theme of competences of the regions in the regions in the EU, and strengthening these competences, and not lose itself in many topics of which are deals with also with of other organizations. And yeah, that's my point. And thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter, for your presentation. And for your clear assessment of the or clear pessimistic assessment about the role of CALRE here in the EU regional parliamentary order in that discussion. And I'm sure we will come back to the question if CALRE has a role, could play the role in relation to the Conference of the Future of Europe, but we leave that to the discussion. And I would then like to hand over to Caroline Charlotte Kosel from the Bavarian Landtag, and she will talk about transnational networking among German-speaking regional parliaments in EU affairs, and certainly illustrate us what the Bavarian Landtag is doing, who is often conceived to be the strongest of these regional parliaments, but the self-perception of the Bavarian Landtag is often a different one. So, Frau Kosel, I hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. From my point of view, it was recently a really realistic view on the CALRE. I will mention some points from the practical point of view from our work in this body. So just I want to present a bit the structure and the involvement of the department, the office in Brussels, and the overall structure of the Bavarian State Parliament, the administration and how we are operating to Munich and back to Brussels. And so let's start with the first slide. Yes. So we are based in Brussels with an office since 2011. This is an own department since a few years. It's an own department with own responsibility and competence. There's me, the head of office, and an assistant based in Brussels, and I would say shared advisor based in Munich, advisor who's responsible for the European politics department in Munich, and the first vice president, supporting the first vice president of the Bavarian State Parliament. I just want to mention that we have a kind of joint office. We are based in the representation of the Free State of Bavaria to the EU, and we are in a constant exchange as we are responsible to represent the overall positions and central points of the Free State of Bavaria. So it's more or less a joining effort. And somebody mentioned already before, I guess it was you, Ms. Abels, that we have several representatives of German regional parliaments in Brussels. So we are 6 to 7 from Bavaria, from Baden-Württemberg, from Hesse, North Rhine-Westphalia, from Saxony, from Brandenburg, and for 50%, the colleague is 50% based in Mainz and 50% based in Brussels from Rhineland, Palatinate. And we have a regular exchange in Brussels to have kind of round table, to have a good exchange on what we are dealing with. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we are one of a department in the Unit A, responsible for members of Parliament, human resources, parliamentary law, and European affairs. There are 5 departments, and so we are the department 5, and the department 4 and 5 are in dealing with European affairs topics. So the department 4 is responsible, in addition, for the Committee of European Affairs and Regional Relations in the Bavarian State Parliament. And yeah, next slide. Just I want to mention what we are doing in practice. So first of all, obviously, we're networking and maintaining contacts with the European institutions and all other European bodies, associations of stakeholders in Brussels. We are kind of early warning system informing the bodies of the Parliament about relevant developments at the European level at an early stage. We do ongoing monitoring of processes and developments. I'm preparing regularly 2 kind of newsletters for the members of Parliament. It's kind of highlights of the week, so weekly newsletter, and topic in focus is just a paper to prepare to go sometimes a bit deeper in some topics and to prepare it a bit not so briefly, just to demonstrate a bit the different point of views of European Parliament, European Commission, the development of the topic at the European level. For all members of the Parliament, we are contact information point, so they can call us and ask several topics or questions if they need something from the European level. We are in Brussels, or the department in Brussels is responsible to support the member in the core, in the Committee of Regions, and the member in CALRE. And I will come back again to those institutions just a bit later. And we're preparing appointments and delegations or committee sessions if needed in Brussels. So next slide, please. It's just a short presentation on how we are informing. So we are networking and responsible for supporting the members in core and CALRE, and mainly informating the members of the Committee of European Affairs. We inform the President on EU affairs in general. And I mention here 2 very important bodies or conferences. It's the Conference of Presidents and the Conference of Directors, so the LPK and the LDK, so the Conference of Directors, Conference of Presidents, and Conference of European on European affairs for the presidents of the German Landtage and the Austrian and the parliaments, and the parliaments of South Tyrol and the German-speaking parliament in Belgium. We do, in cooperation with Department A4, the preparation for those conferences, and we are constantly, in addition, in exchange Department A4 and 5 to best prepare the members of committee and the sessions of the Committee on European Affairs. Just to mention it, to have an impression how we are structured a bit. So next slide, please. This is just a slide to mention or to have a short look into the Committee of Federal and European Affairs and Regional Relations with 14 members. I just mentioned the bodies. This committee is responsible for the subsidiarity control of proposed regulations and direction of the European Commission. Normally we, or the members of Parliament, get reports or the report forms from the state government to have an impression or a short overview on the topic and the relevance for the Free State of Bavaria. This committee deals with green and white papers, communications, and so on. It's kind of preliminary check. What is especially for the Bavarian State Parliament is the next point, the EU consultation. So we are the only German Landtag participating in consultations of the European Commission. In the rules of procedure of the Bavarian State Parliament, it was included several years ago that this Committee of European Affairs makes in addition a preliminary check as well on EU consultations, and it's not so rare that there are opinions and final resolutions of the plenary sent directly to the President of European Commission, European Parliament, and the Committee of Regions. They do as well expert hearings on relevant topics and informational interviews. Just this week, they had an exchange with Mrs. Christa Schweng, the President of the ESC, the European Economic and Social Committee. Next slide, please. So at this stage, we are very present in the core. The Bavarian Parliament has one official member in the European Committee of Regions, and 2 deputy members from 3 different political groups. It's very interesting for me to see. Before I worked in Brussels, I didn't have so much contact with the core, and now it's really a deep look inside this work. It's not so easy for the members, it's my impression, because the core is really has really different members and really interesting member structures, not only at regional level. There are members of regional parliaments with legislative power. There are members of parliaments without legislative power in Europe, and you know very well this body. And the members are active in the core commissions, ENVI, so environment issues, SEDEC, social and education issues, economic issues in Econ, and COTER, the cohesion policy issues. And just today, or since Wednesday until today, there is the 144th plenary session of the core, where all 3 members are at the moment active, and there will be an exchange of views with Herman van Rompuy. After this conference, we have actually where the chair of the European Committee Affairs in the Bavarian State Parliament, Mr. Tobias Gotthardt, on the right, on the left side, will hold just short comments on the conference on the future of Europe and the involvement or the need for involvement of regional parliaments with legislative powers. So next slide, please. It's about the cholera, and it was really interesting to hear what Professor Busjäger mentioned. As I mentioned already at the beginning, it was a realistic view on this. I not yet have so much experience with this body, because I started with my responsibility for the Bavarian State Parliament in 2019. So, but the experience until today are really similar to what Mr. Busjäger mentioned recently. So it is at the moment the first vice president of the Bavarian State Parliament representing the parliament in the cholera. So the Bavarian State Parliament is normally, takes part in the plenary and is the parliament representative for all German regional parliaments in the standing committee. But at the moment, it was different before. but at the moment there is no responsibility for a working group. So it's not really an active role at the moment, and yeah, it has to do with changes in the political landscape of the Bavarian state parliament. There was the election in 2018. But yeah, I just mentioned here on the slide the Calera Core pilot project, where we are active, input from debates in regional parliaments. I will demonstrate it a bit later. And wanted to, yeah, I think I have some comments on Calera. Perhaps it's really the point that there is missing a common basis to be really active in an efficient way. I see it as well that there are different structures and different ways of work in the different regional parliaments. And this is really a challenge. And I as well have the impression that there's a loss of a working body to work on, to give input on several topics, relevant topics. And at the moment, I have the impression that the Calera tries to foster the cooperation with the Committee of Regions, and this is demonstrated in the Calera Core pilot project, I would say, as one example, and is fostering as well the cooperation to the EPRS of the European Parliament, so the European Parliament Research Service. I will mention it a bit later. They started a project or a new approach, I would say, linking the levels, and started with a new unit, so-called linking the levels. But I will mention it a bit later. I think the problem at the moment is as well the pandemic situation. It took a bit of time to reorganize meetings in that body, and yeah, to come together and to have a good exchange. Okay, so next slide, please.
I just would like to ask you to keep an eye on the time, because you had now 15 minutes.
Okay, I will hurry up a bit. Okay, so just to mention it, how to shape the EU, the basis of activities, I would say the recent basis is the Brussels Declaration from 2019. Where it is mentioned that it is about strengthening regional parliaments with legislative powers in the EU's multi-level system. So next slide, I will hurry up a bit. And to show a bit what activities of Bavarian State Parliament are at the present, the participation in consultations I already mentioned. Next slide. What the members of Committee of European Affairs had was an exchange with, study with the experts of RegioParl in 2019. They had a debate on the role of regional parliaments in the EU's multi-level system. The next slide, please. What is currently ongoing in the Bavarian State Parliament is the Calera Core project, input from debates in regional parliaments. Those are debates on the priorities, potential priorities for the European Commission work program for 2022. The Committee of European Affairs decided to give the consultation questionnaire. It's kind of a consultation of the EU, so this is the kind of basic process. They decided to give it in a lead to other committees to prepare opinions, and at the end we hope at mid of June we have a plenary resolution, and this plenary resolution is will be sent to the core to get into the resolution of the core on the Commission work program in end of June, and the Parliament will transmit this result, the resolution as well, directly to the European Commission. So next slide, I already mentioned the linking the levels unit at EPRS. We are a bit active in this to give all the resolutions as well to the EPRS linking the levels unit, to give a bit on input on their preparations, briefings for the MEPs. Next slide, where we are active since December 2020 as an observer is the RegHub network, RegHub 2.0. This is about simplifying EU legislation and cutting red tape, and the members of Parliament could be, and this is the goal, multipliers in their regions to inform more on ongoing service in this project, to be in contact with the stakeholders directly in the region. Next slide, please. And just to mention a few words on the Conference of Future of Europe, where we are very active since a few months. Next slide, please. The activities started in the Bavarian State Parliament with a resolution of the plenary on the communication of the European Commission shaping the Conference on the Future of Europe in 2020. This was directly transmitted to, as a consultation, President of European Commission, European Parliament and the core, the Bavarian MEPs and relevant members of the German Bundestag as well. This was the first time to call for a strong involvement of regional and local actors in the Conference on the Future of Europe. So next slide, please. We are at the moment in a brainstorming on a working level. We have an internal working group in administration, communicating EU politics to citizens and encourage them. And we're now in a brainstorming how we can, in a good way, implement the Conference on the Future of Europe. We prepared, in a common way, all the German Landtage draft declaration on the conference in a two-day meeting in autumn, and presented it to the directors of the parliaments, and the result was, the next slide please, Europe Declaration in February, where the parliament, the presidents of the parliaments, German-speaking parliaments, called for a stronger involvement, direct involvement in the Conference of Future of Europe, and a constant dialogue with the responsible bodies in kind of round table. Next slide, please. At the moment, we try to influence the discussions, the debates on the rules of procedure of the conference, to perhaps have a seat in this conference, a direct seat in the plenary. So from the perspective of Bavarian State Parliament, we had several press statements. We prepare Insta story on the Europe Day on Sunday, where the conference will start. There are own activities of the chair and members of Committee of European Affairs in the Bavarian State Parliament, the brainstorming I already mentioned. And we have an exchange with the Bavarian State government on a working level at the moment, to find out options to be active. And this was just briefly mentioned what we at the moment are doing. Thank you for your attention. And this was it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Frau Kusel, for your very interesting overview, which clearly illustrate what a rich array of activities the Bavarian Landtag is involved in and initiating really in relation to different EU affairs. And it's very interesting to see how active you get involved in the conference on the future of Europe. And as I said, I'm sure we will come back to that in the discussion. And one of the things that you mentioned is already the debate that you had in the Bavarian Landtag with the members of the Regiopal team as part of the Regiopal project. And now we have a presentation from Sarah Meyer and Mario Wolf, presented by Mario, which will give us some ideas of what they did and some of the findings in relation to this survey of activities that they did with German regional members of parliament. So Mario, I would like to hand the micro over to you.
Thank you, Gabi. I also prepared some slides. I will just yeah, thank you very much. My name is Mario Wolf from the research project Regiopal. I just also wanted to welcome you to my presentation. I want to present our work on behalf of me and Sarah Meyer, who's also here with us. And I guess we'll be happy to clarify any remaining questions after the presentation. So I want to present an empirical paper in a relatively early stage. That's why we're also very happy to be here to discuss our results. So just to start with some background, our starting point was the emerging role of regional parliaments in the European multi-level governance. That was, as already mentioned, enhanced through the Lisbon Treaty, who brought some institutional changes and new channels of influence. But nevertheless, as for example, Annalena Högenauer yesterday already examined, regional parliaments still lack a satisfying formal access point in the EU decision-making. And they still face the weakening of its competences vis-a-vis the executive actors. And as a last point, we diagnosed that the scholarly focus was initially on institutional adaptations by regional parliaments on the Lisbon Treaty, where parliaments were seen as a collective institutional actors. So what we asked was, how do subnational MPs deal with this situation? And are there any informal EU-related activities on subnational MPs in EU affairs? So especially we wanted to know with whom are MPs cooperating in EU affairs, and how often, for what purpose are they cooperating, and how can the variance in cooperation efforts be explained? And we use survey data, as already said, that was conducted with among MPs of all German Landtage. I will come back to that later on. So I will just quickly go through some theoretical considerations, then explain our research design and spend some sentences on the data we use, and then describe the results of our empirical analysis, come to a conclusion. So with the cooperation efforts, we are talking about non-institutional and informal ways of regional MPs of getting themselves involved in EU affairs, mainly aiming at information exchange with other actors in the EU governance, multi-level governance, or at directly seeking influence on the decision-making process. In the paper, we discuss the explanatory power of attitudes versus resources when explaining MPs' behavior, but I cannot elaborate on that right now. I can just say that we are using a broad definition of resources, namely immaterial and non-material and material resources. So that's, I can already come to our explanatory variables when explaining the cooperation efforts. We expect that the political experience of subnational MPs is the first and very important explanatory variable, as MPs that are longer in the parliament are more familiar with processes and structures and also informal procedures, and has had more time to build up a network among European actors. Secondly, the EU expertise should enable MPs to cooperate, as when they know the political system and the functioning. We assume that they would have more contacts and more cooperation efforts in EU affairs. And thirdly, the administrative capacity should explain variance in cooperation effort, as this, it just enables MPs to deal with the topics, to have more time and more support by their staff. So, and already moving to the research design, I don't want to spend too much time here. I just wanted to say that we assume the case of Germany as a relatively strong case when explaining subnational MPs' behavior, due to the relatively strong institutional role of regional parliaments in the EU decision-making process, that incentivizes MPs already to get involved in EU affairs. So, as already mentioned, we conducted an online survey amongst all 1,860 MPs in all of the German Länder. We asked them about their EU activities, their usage of formal instruments, about the communication efforts in their daily work, and also about their interaction with other actors. We conducted the survey between October 2020 and March 2021. And after putting a lot of effort into the into the survey and into promoting the survey, we ended up with a response rate of 26%. So when concerning the representativeness of our sample, of course, there are some differences to the original structure of MPs and the original division of MPs in the regional parliaments, but we don't have any critical overweight in favor of pro-European MPs. So we can draw on a good databases to test our hypothesis. So I also don't want to spend too much time on the operationalization. I just want to explain our dependent variables, how we measure cooperation efforts. Out of the answers of the frequency of cooperation efforts in EU affairs with 15 different actors in the European multi-level governance, we calculated an additive indicator assigning values to the frequency, to the stated frequency of MPs, and we standardized the resulting indicator to have a range from 0 to 1. I guess I won't elaborate too much on our independent variables. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the discussion afterwards. So I just want to say, we also control for attitudes towards EU integration, for the regions, the origin of the MP, and gender in our model. So when we start with some descriptive analysis, we ask the question, with which actors are MPs cooperating? So the orange bars reflect the frequency of contact with the respective actor, and the blue bar reflect the overall share of MPs that cooperated with the actor. So I just want to briefly highlight 3 findings that we had here. First of all, regional level actors unsurprisingly play the most important role also in EU affairs. But secondly, you can see that the European Parliament, the Federal Parliament, and other German parliaments are upon the most frequently contacted actors. So here we see the importance of the interparliamentary networking inside of Germany, also reflecting the communicative role of parliaments in the cooperation efforts of subnational MPs. And thirdly, we wanted to take a stand on the argument of subnational actors bypassing the national level in EU affairs that was discussed in the literature. As you can see in the figure, we can't really confirm this hypothesis, as the cooperation behavior is much more complex than that. So also in the survey, we asked MPs for which purposes did they cooperate with the respective actors, and we ended up with this highly complex figure. Just to describe the first bars, they reflect the mean value, and you can see after one, you can already see that receiving information and forwarding information are far more important purposes of cooperation than influencing decision making. So with the background of the already discussed executive dominance in EU politics, one could have the expectation that MPs mostly cooperate with legislative actors for information exchange and with executive actors for influence seeking. But when we take a more precise look on the information exchange activities, we see that the picture is more complex. MPs exchange information mostly also with regional public administration and also other regional actors. And here in this figure, you also see the interparliamentary cooperation as the European Parliament and also the Federal Parliament are amongst the most frequently contacted actors in this purpose. When looking at the influence-seeking activities, we see that the regional government and administration and regional administration are again the most important actors, but also the Federal Parliament and members of the European Parliament. And we interpreted this as these actors are the most promising addresses for MPs to seek for influence in the decision-making process. Whereas other big players in European decision-making, namely the European Commission or the federal government, are being left aside. Obviously, they are supposed to be not open for the concerns of MPs. So when we just briefly describing the results of our multivariate analysis we conducted to explain the cooperation efforts in EU affairs, as highlighted in yellow, you see our explanatory variables that are mostly significant. I don't want to elaborate too much on that, just to say that the duration of membership in the parliament that we measured in years has a very small coefficient. The degree of information a relatively high one, so it's rather the expertise than the seniority that influences the cooperation efforts. So when we just get back to the hypothesis, we can say that resources do play a role in regional MPs cooperation efforts, but as you see here, the attitude or control variables that reflect the attitudes of MPs are not having any influence. And this goes in line with a lot of literature in recent studies on the topic. So just to conclude and to mention our most relevant empirical findings, first of all, I wanted to highlight the importance of the interparliamentary networking that we see in our data on cooperation efforts. And secondly, we can conclude that there's a complex picture of cooperation purposes with different actors in EU affairs that needs to be further investigated. And thirdly, we can conclude a dominant role of resources over attitudes when explaining cooperation efforts. So I want to end with a short outlook. Within this paper, we want to include contextual and institutional factors in our explanatory framework. I can just highlight the ongoing surveys by Regiopal with subnational MPs in Spain, Austria, and Poland. And we are hoping to increase the geographical scope of our analysis to these countries. And for future research, as you can already think, we want to assess regional MPs' formal and informal activities in EU affairs, as there's a lot more to be investigated and a lot more different activities included in our survey. So thanks for your attention. Please feel free to ask any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Mario. Right, so we end the screen sharing. So thanks for your interesting insights into what the ideas the members of regional parliaments, of German regional parliaments, how they actually try to perform their role with regards to EU affairs. Very interesting insights. And we are a little bit over time already, because we still have two discussants here. So I suggest that we will take a little bit of the coffee break. And I would like to encourage our audience already to put things into the chat function, your questions, your ideas, your comments. So we have two discussants. We have Annegret Eppler and we have Martin Zubeck. And Annegret, do you want to start with your comments on Peter Busjäger's and yes, and Frau Kosel's presentation, please?
Yes, I'm happy to start. So I will have my comment a bit broader because it was very interesting to listen to all the 4 presentations, and I think there are some cross-cutting issues. That is why I probably have a bit of a broader framework. The first point I got stuck to when listening the 4 presentations was the starting point of Paul Kindermann, because he said, well, we are in need of a more normative way to deal with regional parliaments in the EU multi-level system. And so immediately it came into my mind, well, it's a nice point to say, well, we need a more normative discussion, but is it really the case? Do we really need more normativity, or when we are now having a topic in social sciences, do we need probably more empirical research on also regional parliaments? I think we need both, because at the one hand side, we still have a lack when it comes to empirical research. So it was really nice to listen to the 3 following papers. But when we have a look on the other hand side, when we watch the current political situation in the EU, I think we are also in need of normative approaches and of some probably normative ideas how democracy in that multi-level system and parliamentarism at different political levels will go on. So what was very interesting for me when listening to the first presentation was that at the end of the presentation, sorry, that was my mobile. At the end of the presentation, we had again the turn towards empiry. So the framework was developed, and then we had further steps at the end of the paper how to do empirical research. When it comes to parliamentary functions, and I think this is a kind of framework we can apply to all that papers, it is yeah, it has been an issue for all parliamentary research since Belchert in the 19th century came up with different parliamentary functions. And I think it is very interesting to try to allocate networking and parliamentary, interparliamentary cooperation within that catalogs we have. So we saw in the paper of Meyer and Wolf how individual MPs are doing our networking, and we saw an institutionalized form of networking in the presentation of Peter Busjäger. And indeed, we have that, I would say, academic dispute how to catch networking. So we have Andreas Maurer for sure with his multi-level parliamentarism, Mehrebenen-Parlamentarismus. He's working on since 2003, and then we have the paper of Crum and Fossum in 2009. So, and Maurer states that networking is more on the side of getting information to be able to control the executives. So for a regional parliament, that would mean the regional executive, so the Landesregierung in Germany or in Austria. And Crum and Fossum are more on the side of well, the articulation function, communication, Mr. Kindermann, you call it communication function, and you also allocate networking in your paper within the communication function. And so it was very nice to see that Kalre in the paper of Peter Busjäger has these new working groups, a lot of new working groups, which are, well, you stated that the results of that working groups we can't really evaluate because there is probably not enough transparency, but we have topics like sustainability, interactive democracy, health, which is really important, natural disasters, cultural topics, education, and so on. And probably these working groups are more in the sphere of communication and information, well, exchange or best practice exchange. And so for me, it was interesting to see then in the paper of Meyer and Wolf that information, to give information and to receive information is one of the most important points when it comes to the cooperation of regional MPs with different other MPs and institutions. So, and I asked myself when they want to receive information, so that's the individual MP, is it because he or she wants to really, is it to take influence? So also to receive information can mean that you want to take influence afterwards, because we have that disbalance when it comes to information between the regional executives and the regional parliaments. So parliamentary functions, this is really a very, I think, a very interesting topic when it comes also to regional parliaments. And it is really a benefit of the paper of Kindermann, in my perspective, that he is not only applying this parliamentary functions on networking, as it has been done in the literature until now, but also on the whole range of parliamentary actions of regional parliaments when it comes to EU affairs. Time is running. I also thought when it comes to that normative perspective, and also, so normativity probably is always a bit inherent to parliamentary research. I don't know, that could be discussed when it comes to EU affairs. I'm not really sure. We are probably a bit normatively biased, because we all want to go to for more democracy and strengthen parliaments and so on. So when we take it normatively and probably go even in the direction of giving policy advice or something like that, then why don't we take into account the other functions? So there's also an electoral function when you come to catalogs of parliamentary functions. An electoral function, we have a legislative function, which was mentioned in the paper of Wolf and Meyer. The function to keep the system also running. So we have different other functions, and probably we should also think of strengthening other functions of regional parliaments in that multi-level system. But if you think that to the end, we come to I think, striking point, because we always have the whole political life and political systems are always in between the two poles of democracy at the one hand side and efficiency at the other hand side. So so that is one point I'm always thinking of when we discuss about regional parliaments. So when we strengthen regional parliaments, and we have, I think, 71 with own legislative competences, when we strengthen them and we really give them probably a veto position in the legislative process, as we had de facto in some regional parliaments in Germany. So do we then destroy the efficiency of the whole system completely? I don't know. We have that example of Thüringen in Germany, which sent its government to the German Bundesrat, having a lot of veto points when it came to EU affairs, and that was not efficient at all. And so I have even a two broader points to make before I'm at the end of my points. So yesterday already Francesco mentioned that we had big challenges. So we had that death bank financial global crisis, we had migrants entering the EU, and now we have that pandemic. And I think the framework for research on regional parliaments changed very much since we started 2011, Gabi and I, and some others who are also here. Pietro, you also mentioned it. So we have a very different political landscape. And I think this is not only the case for regions, as it was discussed yesterday, it's also the case for parliaments and post-parliamentarism, as it was discussed by Anderson and Burns since 1996, I think, is really seems to be more more empirical catchable than ever before. If you think of policy in the multi-level system, if you think of the complexity of the decisions that have to be taken, the role of executives in that pandemic now. So in Germany, for instance, we have that parliamentary reservation when it comes to the restriction of fundamental rights, but it was not. We were not able to keep on this because there was danger for the health of the society. There were deaths and yeah. So that is one thing we should think of, I think, and think of how do we come out of that challenging situation. And the other point is that we have a big dissatisfaction in the society with the whole political system. And Paul Kinderman, you had that in your paper. That was the third point when it came to the democratic challenges in the EU system. And you said, well, we don't have a Europeanized public space, and the public opinion probably changes when it comes to the EU. And I think we should really link probably all that thoughts and all the framework we are researching on and with to that discussions on the really democratic deficit and on that actual current political situation. So what role could regional parliaments take when it comes to EU skepticism, to populist parties, to also the marginalization of parliaments in the whole system? I think in that situation where we have an oscillation between integration and also probably disintegrative trends, so we have big integrative trends also, the financial ruling in the EU changed very much and solidarity increased, but we should think of overcoming this constraining dissensus, which is stated in post-functionalism, and thinking of what role do regional parliaments play. And when you think of also federalism research, Karl Joachim Friedrich, who stated, okay, the EU is not a federation, but it is a federal or quasi-federal system, referring to Livingston in the 1950s, so sociological federalism, that if a society moves on, the institutional structure will follow. Then we should see the regional parliaments as motors of really that societal integration. If we lose here, if we broaden the gap here, if the gap grows between the society and the European integration, then it will be not so easy to catch up. And that's why I really liked what Caroline Kosel presented us on the Bavarian Landtag, because it was not only a lot about internal organization of that EU work, it was also about the office in Brussels, about networking with other Landtage, about Rec Hub, about that pilot project of CALRE and the COR. So I think here we should, I see you, Gabi, here we should lay an emphasis on, here we should go on and think, well, we have that articulation, representation, communication function, and it is most important to go on there. So as Baime states, so the concerns for parliamentarism is old as parliaments are themselves. So I came up with a lot of concerns now, and I think we should not only, and this is a big point, we should not only think about parliamentarism in the EU, but also about the EU itself. So not only democracy and the democratic deficit, but also the development of the EU system. And that's why it is so nice that we now have that conference on the future of Europe. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Annegret, for your ideas and insights into the 4 presentations here. And I hand over directly to Marcin for your comments, please.
Thank you, Gabriele. Thank you for all the presenters for very thought-provoking presentations. I will be brief in order not to take away the basic human right, which is a coffee break. I want to say a few things, and those things will be connected to the fact that I am a bit of an outsider here in this panel. In at least 3 ways. First of all, I don't speak German, but I think that's fixable at some point, and perhaps not the most important thing. But the 2 other things somehow motivate my comments in this panel. So first of all, I come from the unitary state, not the federal one, and I will mention that later in my speech. Well, unitary going to authoritarian, unfortunately, but so far only unitary. And the 3rd thing is that I'm mostly an IR scholar, not necessarily involved with regions and regional integration and regions' role in the European Union. However, I deal with parliaments when it comes to scrutiny of security and foreign policy. And this got me thinking when I was listening to the presentations, especially the presentation by Professor Busiega about Clare, and it popped into my head. So I really did not have time to think it through very thoroughly. So it might be thought-provoking, it might be a complete nonsense. I leave it for you to judge. But I think maybe there is a possibility to draw certain parallels between the stance of regional parliaments in the EU and third countries. I mean the non-members of the European Union. I specifically here mean the European neighborhood countries involved in the European neighborhood policy. And the parallel I'm thinking about is that even though they are very much submit to the rules that are being created in the European Union, they do not have that much influence over the shape of those rules. And so it got me thinking that perhaps we could say something similar. I know it's not exactly the same, but something similar about the regions in the European Union. As Professor Busiega was saying, when they became the part of the EU legal framework, some of their competencies were taken away. And therefore, such institutions as the Committee of Regions or the international parliamentary institutions such as CLARE were created, perhaps in order to somehow mitigate this loss of certain competencies. Just like certain international parliamentary assemblies are created in order to mitigate the inability of the European neighborhood policy countries to influence the EU policy making, so that they are consulted, they can be duly heard, and some of their ideas might come to the mainstream of the EU decision making. So that I'm not sure to what extent this parallel is justified, but my IR background kicked in simply when I was listening to your presentation. So as I said, maybe it's food for thought, maybe it's an utter nonsense. I leave it for you to think it over. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And the other thing, especially in relation to what Paul was talking about, so this normative grammar. And again, my background in IR got me thinking and perhaps ask you a question. In this normative grammar you presented, is there a room for power when it comes to the function of regional parliament? I think Annegret already hinted at this. Should we consider other functions as well in this normative grammar book. So, and I mean, not only power, but maybe something even more, how should I put it, even more disturbing or even illegitimate to a certain extent, dominance. Dominance in the sense that, and I think someone has already asked this question in the chat, if, I am now speaking normatively, if we should give regional assemblies or regional parliaments more power within the EU, and those regional parliaments would be the ones with legislative power, wouldn't they dominate a scene and make other regional parliaments, regional assemblies, well, less influential? And I specifically mean those coming from the states which do not have regional parliaments with legislative power, such as Poland, for example, and many other countries as well. So would that not lead to some sort of illicit hierarchy or status deprivation, not only from regional parliaments without legislative power, but also perhaps from some member states? We know that some regions in the EU can be very powerful, and if we give them more power, they will become even more powerful. And well, Bavaria, for example, we heard today about many activities that Bavarian regional parliament is carrying out in Brussels, even without having too much formal power within the EU structures. So I wonder if there is a room for power or even dominance in this normative grammar. And also another thing, it's an open question whether we could add it to this normative grammar. If, again, I'm speaking normatively, if we should give the regional parliaments more power in the EU political system, should that lead to some sort of differentiation when it comes to the change in the relation of between lawmaking arrangements and executive and legislative powers within the European Union? Should it lead to creation of some sort of specialized agencies that support the parliaments in exercising, regional parliaments in exercising their powers? So this normative grammar is something that caught my eye clearly, and I really like the paper, Paul. So that's why I'm asking whether we should or we could add something to this vocabulary, normative vocabulary. And also there was one thing I wanted to mention regarding Clara and Professor Busiaga's paper. So I don't think you actually have answered the question in the title of your paper. So is it much to do about nothing, or maybe so far it is much to do about nothing? Maybe there is a future in front of this this organization, and also whether it is able to come up with some sort of coherent and unified view on the future of Europe. That would be my question, and here I stop so that the audience can perhaps chime in as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Masa, and for not taking your whole 10 minutes, because we are a bit over time, but I suggest that we still have a bit of discussion. And what I like to suggest that we take into account also the 3 questions raised in the chat, and then that all panelists in the order of presentations have just maybe maximum 2 minutes to respond to that. Just pick out those issues you find most important and relevant for you. And firstly, Emma in the chat raised exactly the question which Massin mentioned as well. What about all those states where we do have no regional parliaments, no regional administrative level? Are they going to lose out? How can they be involved besides the COR involvement in this landscape? And then we have 2 questions from Donette. The first goes, to Mario as well. The question is here, if the interparliamentary communication between MEPs improves really input legitimacy of these regional parliaments, and the question directly to Paul, but essentially of a more general nature. And the question is, if we think about judging the regional parliaments, if it is judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree. I think that's quite a nice metaphor here. And setting the standards of democratic function come from national parliaments, and does that bring in challenges for thinking about regional parliaments? So I would like to encourage you to take these questions, comments also into account. And as I said, I propose that we start in the order of presentation. So Paul, would you like to respond to just some of the issues being raised here by discussions by the audience, please, Paul?
Yes, thanks. And I sort of try to give a wrapped up response to the various very interesting aspects that have been put forward. Maybe I start by responding to the first aspect that Annegret Eppler mentioned, because indeed, Annegret mentioned that sort of whether it is the right way to look, or whether it's sort of on a general level, we need more normativity, I think was the formulation. And actually the general intent of my paper was quite to the opposite, not to bring in normativity, because I think there is a lot of normativity going on. This is why I sort of started by briefly laying out these narratives, both in political and in academic discourse. The claim that the involvement of regional parliaments, very broadly enhance EU legitimacy is out there. It's effective. So it's a normativity in practice, if you want. And Sarah Meyer will issue me for using that term, but my approach has sort of a critical intent in that it says, well, if this claim is out there and if it's used, if it is justifying political initiatives and research, then we should be really careful and we should know what we are talking about. We should analyze the normative grammar. So that's sort of the basic idea, and this obviously pertains to the nice question regarding the fish's ability to climb a tree, because indeed I would say in general I'm rather skeptical about the ability of regional parliaments, but I mean, I tried to find a nice way of adapting the metaphor. We could say what we are doing in the moment is we look at the fish barking at the tree and we are thinking about whether it should, so it's a normative question, try to climb up. But for us to judge that, we obviously need normative standards. And that's, just very briefly a point that is nicely taken up regarding national parliaments by Carina Sprunk, who is arguing that now referring also to the question of Donette, we should sort of accept that parliaments have new functions and that we shouldn't, care too much or take these old functions as our normative standards. But still, obviously, the question is, in what sense do these new functions compensate for the old ones? In what sense do these new functions add to democratic legitimacy at EU level? So still, this is a normative question that we need to clarify. And maybe my last point regarding to the very fitting question or fitting remark of Martin regarding the question of power. I mean, since it's a normative analytical framework, power itself would not play a role in that, but I think it's completely to the point in the sense that, and I argue that in another short paper, obviously framing the institutional interest, for example, especially of German subnational parliaments, to get empowered in EU multi-governance flies better if it is framed in terms of democratic added value, right? So it makes more sense if you think of the parliamentary involvement in terms of legitimizing and enhancing legitimacy. But that obviously would need to be proven. And so if we really take sort of from the outset the perspective of enhancing EU legitimacy in terms of democracy, we might from the start need to include regional parliaments without legislative competence in the narrow sense. For example, the French assemblies, who do have some power, but not autonomous legislative power. So again, I would sort of urge to clearly distinguish what are we talking about and what are we asking in the concrete census. And if we really focus, or if we, let's say, take seriously this claim of legitimizing via parliamentarization, then these aspects, and as you rightly pointed out, need to be taken into account and quite clearly. I stop here.
Okay, thank you, Paul, for your short comments and response. And I just hand over to Peter Busjäger, and you can just pick on the things that you would like to respond to briefly. Thank you. Very briefly,
I thank you, Martin, for your interesting comments, your helpful input. It's no nonsense. It's very innovative thinking. What I want to summarize is that CALRE is in its current organization a helpful tool for representatives of regional parliaments with legislative competences for networking and for getting in touch with each other and to enhance their knowledge about European politics and so on. But it is not an effective organization for influencing the European debate on division of competences, of distribution of competences between European level, nation state level, and regional level. And the problems I have explained, and the structural problems. From my opinion, CALRE is currently not able to influence the debate on future of Europe in essential points, and that's the fact from my point of view. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Thank you very much, Peter. I just hand over to Ms. Kosel, please.
Yes, there were already some interesting points. Just to mention one aspect from my perspective, as a very practical perspective in this debate, I have the impression that, well, I think we have to ask if there is really the need to build up another structure or build up new structures or change the structures, the legal framework we have in the European Union, rather than to have a look on the persons who are active in the political process. They can network, and it's interesting to see, just to mention an example from the Bavarian State Parliament, the chair of the Committee of European Affairs is a former member of the administration in the European Parliament with a lot of experience and competence from the European level, and very well aware of what is possible to network apart from the court or the institutions or bodies on the European level. So I think it depends on who is active and with what kind of experience they have. I think, just to mention one point to the CALRE, this tool was for me very interesting to see, because it's really a body that makes sense at the European level, and that is important. And yeah, the structure and the working basis, or which is not really their common working basis, is really a problem to be more active, especially in the conference on the future of Europe. And yeah, I can't say more. It was my impression from this debate that from a practical perspective, it depends really on who is active as member of parliament. And yeah. Thank you.
Okay, yes, thank you so much, Ms. Kosel. And now we have Mario. You might want to respond to some of the issues raised as well.
Well, I just to add something, another point to the discussion, maybe also taking a stand on the questions by the audience. I just wanted to take a stand on the question if on the question of Eastern European states and their EU involvement, and if they are being left out of the calculation. I just wanted to highlight the striking lack of investigation about these actors. I mean, if we are talking about regional parliaments, we're mostly talking about Western and Central Europe. So yeah, I can almost partially confirm that thesis, that they are kind of being left out. But just wanted to point on our survey that we are conducting in Poland, where we are hoping to gain more insight in the attitudes toward the EU integration and their involvement in EU affairs.
Okay, yes, thank you very much, Mario, also for your responses here. And I would like to thank all presenters, all discussants for a very intense, fruitful debate here, for great insights that we had into parliaments, regional parliaments, and how they try to shape the EU. And of course, thanks to the audience here.